Welcome to the deep dive. Got a big bag of vibrant red gochugaru tucked away in your kitchen.
That essential Korean staple.
Yeah, maybe sitting on a shelf, or perhaps you've done what loads of people do and decided the freezer is the ultimate fortress for freshness.
Right, keep it forever.
If so, get ready. Because the sources you've shared with us, a stack of online insights and some actual research findings, might just challenge everything you thought you knew about storing it.
It's such a fundamental ingredient, isn't it? It gives you that unique Korean heat and depth.
Totally.
And our mission, diving into these sources, is really to figure out the absolute best way to keep your gochugaru flavorful and safe.
Because the common wisdom, especially that freezer idea, seems to be
potentially problematic, yeah.
Problematic is maybe putting it mildly, based on what we found. I mean, most of us have probably been operating under the assumption that freezing is like the gold standard, right?
It preserves everything forever.
You just shove it in the icy void and time stops. Simple.
It's a very common belief. And understandable, too. The freezer does extend the life of many things dramatically, no question.
Right.
But the sources reveal that red pepper powder, gochugaru, it has unique characteristics, things that make the freezer environment, well, less good for it, maybe even actively bad.
Okay, let's dig into why. Why isn't the freezer the friend we thought it was for gochugaru? What are the specific issues the sources point to?
Okay, so the primary villain here seems to be moisture.
Moisture. In a freezer? That sounds weird.
It does sound strange, I know. But think about it. Every time you open that freezer door,
warm air rushes in.
Exactly. Warmer, more humid air. Then you close it, that air cools down fast, and what do you get?
Condensation, like on a cold can of soda.
Precisely. And that moisture forms inside the bag or the container. And gochugaru, apparently, is highly susceptible to absorbing that moisture. It just sucks it right up from the air.
Oh.
The sources are pretty clear that this increased humidity, even inside the freezer, creates conditions that are actually ripe for mold growth.
Mold? You're kidding. At like minus 20 degrees.
Yeah.
That feels incredibly counterintuitive.
It really does, doesn't it? But the sources detail specific molds that can, tolerate or even thrive in these damp, cold conditions. They mention species like Aspergillus and Penicillium.
Aspergillus. Penicillium.
Okay.
And this isn't just like a theory. One research finding we looked at referenced an experiment by the National Institute of Agricultural Sciences, NIAST.
NIAST, got it. What did their experiment show?
Okay, this is where it gets truly surprising. The NIAST experiment actually showed the highest mold growth occurred at freezer temperatures.
Oh, highest.
Yep, specifically minus 20 degrees Celsius. So that just completely contradicts the idea that freezing stops everything dead in its tracks, at least for gochugaru.
Wow. So the place we thought was stopping decay is actually maybe helping certain molds grow faster.
It seems that way for these specific types, yes.
And that brings us to the really concerning part, doesn't it? It's not just the yuck factor of visible mold we need to worry about. No, this is the critical takeaway. And frankly, the most alarming part of the sources we read, certain types of these molds, particularly some Aspergillus species, they don't just sit there. They can produce potent, invisible toxins.
Toxin, okay.
The sources specifically name aflatoxin and ochratoxin.
Aflatoxin, I've definitely heard of that. Usually with peanuts or corn, right? Why is it so bad?
It's about its severity. According to the World Health Organization, the WHO, aflatoxin is classified as a Class 1 carcinogen.
Class 1,
Yeah.
That's the highest risk category, isn't it?
It is. These toxins are linked to serious long-term health problems. We're talking liver damage, kidney damage, certain cancers. It's nasty stuff.
And there was a crucial detail in the sources. These toxins, they're incredibly stable. Like you can't just cook them away.
Precisely. That's a key finding highlighted over and over. Unlike many bacteria or, viruses that get destroyed by normal cooking heat,
Right.
these specific toxins are highly resistant. They need extremely high temperatures to break down, like 270 to 280 degrees Celsius, maybe even more.
So way hotter than boiling or frying or baking.
Oh, much hotter. Normal cooking temperatures just aren't high enough to get rid of them.
So if these molds grow and produce toxins in your gochugaru while it's in the freezer, those toxins are very likely staying in your food even after you've cooked with it.
Pretty much.
That really shifts the concern, doesn't it? From just, ooh, moldy spice to, hang on, is this potentially putting my health at risk?
It absolutely does. It moves straight from a quality issue to a serious safety issue.
And speaking of quality,
Yeah.
even if we set aside the mold and toxin risk for a second, the sources also said freezing just plain damages the quality of the powder itself.
Oh, definitely. Even if you somehow avoided the mold, the quality suffers significantly.
How so?
Well, think about those repeated freezing and thawing cycles every time you open and close the door. Combine that with air exposure, the moisture absorption we talked about, it just degrades the powder pretty quickly, actually.
What specifically happens? Like, what would you notice?
The sources mention a distinct loss of the powder's unique aroma, its smell, and that vibrant, spicy flavor. The fu, as they say in Korean.
Yeah, the essence of it.
Exactly. They say it quickly deteriorates in color and smell, too. And because gochugaru naturally contains oils, those freeze-thaw cycles and air exposure make it much more prone to becoming rancid,
Rancid gochugaru. That sounds deeply unpleasant.
It could really impact the taste of your cooking, yeah. And just practically, the powder itself can get hard, clumped together.
Oh, right. Making it a pain to measure or sprinkle.
Exactly. Just inconvenient to use.
Okay, so the evidence against freezing for gochugaru seems pretty compelling. We've got moisture absorption, specific molds that actually like freezer temps, according to that NIOST research.
Minus 20 C, yeah.
Dangerous heat-resistant toxins like aflatoxin, flagged by the WHO, and just general loss of flavor, aroma, color, plus rancidity and clumping.
That about sums up the case against the freezer, yes.
So if the freezer is largely off the table, what do the sources actually recommend? What are the best ways to store it to keep it good and safe? The safer alternatives.
Right. So the most consistent advice across the board is simple, but crucial. Store it in a cool, dark, and dry place. And very importantly, in a properly sealed container.
Just the pantry then.
Maybe. For small amounts, you'll use up relatively quickly, perhaps, if your pantry is genuinely cool and dry. But honestly, refrigeration is highlighted as a much better option overall.
The fridge, I guess.
Especially for keeping it fresh longer. Storing small amounts in an airtight container in the refrigerator, ideally between, say, 0 and 4 degrees Celsius, that really helps minimize exposure to air and moisture. And the consistent low temperature helps inhibit mold.
Makes sense. And there was something specific about humidity levels.
Yes, one source gave a specific number. It said, try to keep the store of environment's humidity below 69%.
69%, okay.
Which is, lower than many typical kitchen environments might be, especially in summer or near a sink. And interestingly, that NIOST experiment, it also found that storage at 10 degrees Celsius resulted in the least mold growth.
10 degrees C, so warmer than a fridge, but cooler than room temp.
Exactly. Compared to the freezer or room temperature, so that suggests maybe a cool pantry or a basement might be better than just a warm cupboard, even if you don't refrigerate it.
Okay. What about if you buy one of those huge bags?
Yeah.
Because it's way more economical, but you need to store it for a really long time, maybe a year or more.
Yes. For truly long-term storage, the sources offer a different strategy altogether. Store dried red peppers the whole instead of the ground powder.
The whole peppers?
Yeah. They noted that the whole dried peppers are significantly less prone to mold growth over long periods compared to the processed powder. Makes sense, right? Less surface area.
Yeah, less exposed.
So the idea is you store the whole peppers and then just grind what you need when you need it. Fresher flavor that way too, probably.
That's actually a great idea. Now, you mentioned earlier that one source sort of brought up conditional freezing with extreme caution. How do we square that with all these really strong warnings against it? Seems contradictory.
It does, and it was presented very much as an exception, definitely not the general rule. The idea was only if you absolutely need very long-term storage for the powder itself, and you're absolutely certain you will access it very infrequently.
Like hardly ever open that pack.
Exactly. Then you might be able to store it in small vacuum-sealed packets. But they heavily stressed not opening the main freezer frequently and only taking out the tiny bit you need for immediate use.
To avoid those temperature swings and moisture getting in.
Precisely. But honestly, given that NIOST finding about mold growth being highest at minus 20 C, this conditional freezing method still feels quite risky. It wasn't the primary recommendation by any stretch. The overwhelming message was really avoid freezing if you can. Prioritize cool, dry storage or refrigeration, or just keep the dried peppers for the long haul.
Right. Okay, so let's bring it all back to you, the listener. What does this whole deep dive into your sources ultimately mean for that bag of gochujang sitting in your kitchen right now?
Well, it really means challenging that common assumption, that deeply ingrained habit, perhaps, that the freezer is always the safest place.
Yeah.
The conventional wisdom about freezing gochujang could actually be risking both the vibrant flavor you paid for and, more seriously, potentially your health.
Mainly because of that moisture issue feeding mold.
Right, facilitating mold growth and the production of those dangerous heat-stable toxins like the WHO Class 1 carcinogen aflatoxin.
So the sources strongly point towards what?
Yeah.
Cooler, drier storage methods.
Yeah, like refrigeration for everyday amounts, keeping it airtight.
Or keeping it in its whole dried pepper form if you need it to last ages.
Exactly. Those seem to be much better ways to ensure your red pepper powder stays delicious and, crucially, safe to use.
It's really fascinating, isn't it, how these specific details like moisture absorption in powder or the temperature tolerance of certain specific molds can completely flip a common storage belief right on its head.
It really highlights how crucial it is to understand the specific properties of individual ingredients. They're not all the same.
Absolutely. That freezer door.
Yeah.
It's not the universal preservation solution we sometimes just assume it is.
Definitely not.
So thinking about that and how many things we just automatically toss into the freezer or maybe just keep in the pantry without a second thought, does this deep dive into gochujang make you pause and wonder, about the best way to store other pantry staples, other spices?
Yeah.
How might the unique properties of different foods actually require surprisingly specific preservation methods that maybe we aren't aware of? Something to consider next time you're putting the groceries away.